Hello everyone and welcome to part 4 of our Finding Steps Sewalong. It's taken me a little while to get to part 4, so apologies for that. We all know sometimes life gets in the way, and our stitching gets pushed to the side, but when things get busy, that's actually when we really need to sit and find our 5 minutes for stitching, but we'll get there. So it appears that a lot of you basket weave is not your favorite stitch. So I've got one section here that has been stitched. Now what you'll notice with the basket weave that was in part 3 is that you find that when you look at the individual stitches, they actually look quite messy. But when you look at it as a whole complete unit, and I put the border around it, you're not actually focusing as much on individual stitches, but that you focus mostly on the overall piece, and any imperfections with your stitching become less obvious. So you need to keep it in context. So if your stitches are imperfect, which mine definitely are, it's okay. It's really okay. If you find that you can leave it for a little while, and if you find that there's still a little bit too imperfect, you can actually unpick it and redo it. So it's not something that's really crucial to the outcome. It's decorative stitching. So, but as promised, I am going to give you a much simpler block to stitch this time. And what we're doing is we are doing this one here, which has a few different names. I have always known it referred to as flowering blossom, and there's a few blocks that are actually known as that, but that's what I'm just going to call it. You can either call it a chain stitch because it's almost like a woven, or you can call it a flowering blossom, or you can call it whatever you choose to call it. So it's a really nice simple block. I'm going to just swap to the other camera so you can see it in the big screen. There we go. Alright, so what we're going to do, now if we have a look at this, there's a few different ways that you can do it. Now I have my preference for the way that I do it, but as I have previously said, it is a preference only. Now how you decide to stitch it is really up to you. Initially, probably what you would do when you look at it, and you'll go, okay, so what I'll do is I'll follow my path across this way, and then I'll follow it back and I'll do my chain, and then I'll do my chains in the opposite direction. What happens if you do it that way is you're left with these crosses in the centers that aren't stitched. So I find that that's a little bit inconvenient. The other thing is I like to change directions the least amount of times that I can. What I find, if I can find a method that I can do straight rows of stitching, I get a better result. So if you examine this one a little bit closely, what you'll find is that you can do straight rows of stitching, east and west, north and south. And so what we're doing is we're incorporating our little blossoms in the center here, and then we have some diagonal rows in both directions. So let's get started with our stitching. We're just going back to our knot this time, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a roll of stitching across the bottom, and I'm going straight all the way across, carrying my thread. That's only a very short carry across here. And I'm just going to do a straight roll stitching all the way across. Obviously I'm left-handed, so I'm stitching from left to right. For those of you that are right-handed, you're going to stitch from right to left. Alright, let's get started. This actually stitches up really quickly, which is the complete opposite of what we did in our last block. Okay, so we can start anywhere at this point. I'm going to start at the bottom. I'm going to just come up on my first stitch. And I've got my variegated Sashiko thread today. This one here, my Olympus thread. This is colour 157. It's one of my favourites. I should stop saying it's my favourite, because every project I work on I seem to say that my thread is my favourite, because at that point in time it actually is my favourite. So I'm just going to do my first stitch, get myself sorted. I'm going to push the camera down just a little bit further, and I'm not going to see if we can. And I'm going to start loading a few stitches onto my needle. So I've got my first stitch. I'm going to pick it up. My second stitch, and I'm going to carry across my little gap. See there? Carrying across. Pull my thread needle through. Okay, so what I've found is this is devised of straight rows of stitching. This makes it much quicker, but also we have straight rows of stitching when we're finished, because we're not trying to make our thread turn constantly. You hear that noise in the background? It's raining here today. Just a little shower. Okay, so I'm going to just continue across, carrying my thread. Nice and quick. Across my panel. Because I'm carrying my thread quite a well, it's not quite a distance, it's less than half a centimetre, about half a centimetre, I find I can't pick up as many stitches on my needle as I normally would when my stitches are closer together. That's okay. I've also noticed that quite a few of you have mentioned that you have a little bit of trouble with the thread. So I just want to address that as well. So what we've got is we've got our thread here that we plaited together and learnt how to manage in part 1 of our sew along. When we pull that thread out, we do have quite a long strand of thread. So if you feel that that's too long for you to manage, you can cut it in half, of course. So it really is a personal choice, and it can sometimes depend on the project that you're working on, that you feel more comfortable working with the shorter length of thread, or if you've got really nice simple rows of stitching that you're progressing quite quickly with, you may feel comfortable working with a longer thread so that you don't have to keep starting and stopping. So that's my first row. So I promise that this one is so much quicker and simpler than our basket weave. So now those threads are a little bit tight, so I'm just ease it along with my finger, give the fabric a little tug so that the stitches sit on the top. Okay. So oh, we've had a little glitch there with our camera, so we'll just, yep, well, all looks good again. Okay, so we've got our first row. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to carry my thread down, and I'm going to come up and show you this row across here. I'm going to turn my work. And normally I wouldn't carry across to this one. For the sake of the video, I'm going to, so that we can see how easy it is to stitch. Remember on the back to leave that little breadth of thread so that it doesn't need to be that large, so that it gives the room for our thread to turn, and so our stitches on the top are straight. So what we're doing with this one is we're actually doing one section of our little flower center, our blossom center. And pull that through. And I'll just do a little more. Make sure our stitches aren't too tight, and I'll just stitch to the top. This is actually one of my favourite sections to stitch. That one. So you can see when we do our top to bottom rows, what we're doing is we're incorporating this little stitch in the center here as we go. So this is our north south, but then when we do our rows across this way, what we'll be doing is in this row we'll actually be doing our centers of our crosses as well, or our blossoms. So then the next one to show you is that we're actually going to be doing a diagonal. So I'm going to come up to this stitch here. Now the order that you stitch it, my camera just keeps disconnecting all the time here for some reason, but we'll get there. We're almost there. It's a nice simple stitching today. What we're going to be doing this time, if I pull my needle through, is if we look at it this way, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be stitching a diagonal row all the way through here. So let me get started with that stitching for you. Again, I'm going to turn my work around a little bit. The wonderful thing about Sashiko is that we can just turn our work to suit ourselves. On a little side note, I noticed in a couple of Sashiko groups, the question that is consistently gets asked is, do you use a hoop? So I know that I briefly touched on this, that we don't use a hoop because of the way that we load the stitches onto our needle. So for example, if I had my fabric taut in a hoop like this, there is no way I would be able to add my stitches onto a hoop. So traditionally, no hoop was used. So if anybody asks the question, do you use a hoop for Sashiko? I'm going to say no, never. Having said that, there are always exemptions to the rule. Not everyone has the ability or the muscle control to be able to stitch freely without a hoop. If you physically need to use a hoop to be able to continue your stitching, then please use a hoop and enjoy your stitching. Being able to do the process and enjoy your stitching is much more important than whether or not you use a hoop. Traditionally, hoops weren't used because the origins of Sashiko, they didn't have the hoop to stitch with. So it was a form of mending, and so there were no hoops. So it was loading your stitches onto your fabric. I'm just going to pull that through. Go. So you can see now I've got a row of stitches across, and then we are going to do the opposite diagonal as well. So that's all 4 of the areas of stitching. So we've got north south, east west, we've got diagonal, so bottom left to top right, and we've got bottom right to top left. Now when you stitch all of those rows, what you're going to do is you're going to incorporate all of those stitches. So at this point, it looks a little unruly, or it looks a little odd that we're actually going to be incorporating all those stitches. But what you'll find is it will come together. As for the order that you stitch your design in, it is purely up to you and the way that your thought patterns work. Some of you will need to stitch all of your up and down rows first, and left and right, and then do your diagonals, and that's perfectly okay. You can stitch in any order that you choose. What I tend to do, and it's just the way that my brain works, is what I will do is I will actually just stitch to the end of the row, and then I will find what is my closest row to stitch, which would be this one here, and so then I will stitch down this row because that's the closest, and then I will find the next closest stitch, which would probably be this one here, and so then I will stitch across and back. So it really doesn't matter the order that you stitch these in. It's really just a personal choice. We're using beautiful variegated threads, so if you want to be a little more selective with your variations on where they lie, you probably could, you could actually stitch individual rows, or you could stitch backwards and forwards. But once you get all your rows stitched together, you're going to get a really nice variance anyway. So that's all for today. Nice and easy. Don't forget, if you haven't joined our Facebook group yet, please head over to Indigo Niche Sashiko Community. Just change back. So Indigo Niche Sashiko Community. Please make sure that you do answer the membership questions so that we know that you're a real person. You don't need to have purchased any Indigo Niche products, but the group is designed for discussion on Indigo Niche products only. Anyway, projects and products. So we have lots of people who are working and posting their progress on this panel. If you are working on stitching your Finding Steps panel, please post some photos into our Facebook group so we can see. We love seeing the different inspiration for all the different colours. So that's about all for me for this project for today, for part 4. What I'm going to do is I need to go and get these stitched for you, and you can see here that I haven't got my basket weave finished, so I need to go and grab and get that stitched along. We're working on some other projects at the moment, so yeah, for those of you, a little sneak peek, it involves hexagons, so stay tuned. I hope you have a good week and enjoy your stitching. Bye for now.